Now that we've discussed the research and literature behind the field of music in movies, as well as their application in several case studies of iconic film soundtracks, in this episode I would like to propose and discuss a theoretical experiment we could conduct that would both confirm some of the findings of the research we discussed, as well as fill in some of the gaps in the literature. For this experiment, there were a few key questions and findings I wanted to address. Firstly, I wanted to test if the four-dimensional theory of the association between music and emotions holds true in conditions where the music is played by itself and with accompanying film. Just to recap, the four-dimensional valence theory of music posits that certain properties of music give rise to perceived positive or negative affect and high or low arousal. Specifically, music in a major mode leads to positive or happy affect, while music played in a minor mode leads to a negative affect. Furthermore, the dissonance or consonance of music harmony also contributes to the perceived effect. More consonant harmonies lead to a positive affect, while more dissonant harmonies lead to a more negative affect. In terms of arousal, slower tempos and regular rhythms lead to low arousal, while faster tempos and irregular rhythms lead to higher arousal. In order to test if this theory is true, I would ask participants in the study to rate pieces on a scale of 1 to 10 for affect and a scale of 1 to 10 for arousal. These pieces would be hand-selected and would have fast or slow tempos with consonant or dissonant harmonies, would be major or minor mode, etc. Basically, they would fit somewhere along the four-dimensional scale of four-dimensional valence theory. So, we would see if these participants' ratings of the music match what we would expect given their musical properties and how they fit on the four-dimensional valence theory's graph. The second question we would address is how these pieces of music influence emotional, arousal, and contextual perception of film scenes. While our first question and evaluation task aimed to evaluate the validity of four-dimensional theory by asking the participants to assign emotion and arousal ratings to music by itself, our second question aims to ascertain whether these emotion and arousal ratings are actually predictive of how playing the same music over film scenes affects emotion and arousal ratings of the scenes, how it actually affects the evaluation of the film rather than just the music. Although it may seem obvious that, for example, playing music that was rated as happy over just a regular film scene will make viewers also rate the scene as happy, this may not always be the case. One reason, for example, this may not be the case is due to conflicting content found in the scene and in the music. For example, a melancholic slow song playing over a happy dancing scene may not completely cause viewers to see the scene as melancholic, so basically it's not always completely dictated by music. Their emotions and perceptions of these types of scenes are likely to be more complex and, well, researchable. Overall, this second question is important to examine how predictive our initial music ratings are to the overlaid film ratings, as it demonstrates the strength of music in influencing viewers' perception of emotion and arousal in film. Our final question is regarding the effect of musical expertise in interpreting music and music in film. This was the major question for future research addressed in Baumgartner's 2006 paper regarding music-related emotional experiences. As such, our experiment would use two groups, one consisting of untrained participants and the other consisting of musicians with extensive instrument training. We would thus compare and contrast these two groups after conforming the experiment to look for any significant differences that musical expertise may cause in interpretation of music, film, or music and film. Keeping these three questions in mind, here is our experimental paradigm. First, I want to state our null and alternative hypotheses. Firstly, our null hypothesis is that the four-dimension theory isn't valid and that music has no effect on viewers' perception of emotion or arousal in film whatsoever. Our alternative hypothesis is that the four-dimensional theory can predict the emotional and arousal associations with music, as well as that music has a profound impact on film perception, specifically in regards to the emotion and arousal. To test these hypotheses, we would gather a group of 30 musical experts. We classify musical experts, in this case, as having 10 or more years of instrument experience, and a group of 30 non-musical experts with no instrument experience beyond basic knowledge to serve as our two participant groups. These two groups would be controlled for between age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, education, and a myriad of other factors to eliminate as many confounding variables as possible. We would then have all participants in both groups evaluate 4 pieces of music to test the validity of the four-dimensional theory. The first piece of music would be positive affect, high arousal music in major mode with a fast tempo, consonant harmony, and irregular rhythm. This would be classified as happy music, and as you can see, it's on one sort of extreme of the two axes of four-dimensional theory. Our second piece of music would have negative affect, high arousal, and it would have the properties we discussed in four-dimensional theory, such as being played in minor mode, being played with fast tempo, being played with an irregular rhythm, so on and so forth, and this would be termed angry music. Positive affect low arousal music would be calm music, and negative affect low arousal music would be sad music. And again, these types of music would have the properties specified in four-dimensional theory that we expect. The evaluation would be, as I have previously mentioned, a 1 to 10 scale from negative to positive affect and a 1 to 10 scale from low to high arousal. So, essentially, we would get 2 numbers from every single one of our participants for each of the songs, one detailing their perception of the affect of the music, and the other detailing their perception of the arousal of the music. 1, again, being negative affect, 10 being positive affect, 1 for arousal being low arousal, 10 being high arousal, and 5 being the neutral for both the emotion or affect scale and the arousal scale. After this first stage of music evaluations, we would show participants a video of a person walking with no other arousing or emotional content, and then ask them to evaluate the video with the emotional scales and the arousal scales. The goal of presenting this video with no music is to get participant ratings as close to a neutral 5 on the affective/emotional scale as possible, and as close to a neutral 5 on the arousal scale as possible. For this reason, this video is called our neutral video. We would then impose our 4 pieces of happy, angry, calm, and sad music over this neutral video, and then ask participants to evaluate the video again after each condition to see how their ratings change. This would allow us to obtain quantitative data as to the emotional and arousal effect that music has when played in conjunction with film. Of note, we would switch up the order in which the video is imposed with happy music, sad music, angry music, and calm music, and control these orders to eliminate confounding variables such as participant fatigue after watching the same video 5 times in a row, which may cause, for example, consistent lower arousal ratings for the 4th music condition presented, no matter what it was. After our set of experiments with the neutral video, we would then show the participants a video without music that has clearly happy emotional content. We would then repeat the previous experiment, but with this clearly happy video instead. We would then observe if the nature or the significance of the emotional and arousal changes differ when the music played over the happy scene is congruent, aka a happy music over a happy scene, or incongruent, aka sad, angry, or calm music over a happy scene. Throughout both of these experiments, participants would also be free at any point to comment on the context of the video, as the research stated that sometimes contextual perception may change without a change in emotion or arousal. After these experiments, we would first examine for significance in arousal using a t-test for each of the pieces of music. If all pieces of music were neutral, then they would have expected values of 5 for both the emotion and arousal scales. We could test if participants significantly rated, for example, happy music as being above a 5 for emotion and being above a 5 for an arousal, so on and so forth for the other music conditions. If we found that these ratings were significant in the direction that we expect with four-dimensional valence theory, then we would be able to reject our null hypothesis and accept our alternative hypothesis that four-dimensional valence theory is valid. And again, our sample size for this t-test is 60, as we are using both groups of participants. We would then examine for significance in the difference between emotion and arousal ratings for videos without music and with music. If music doesn't affect emotion or arousal in these videos at all, our expected value for the difference in ratings would be 0. If, however, the difference in ratings when imposing, for example, happy music over the neutral video was consistently a +3 in emotion and arousal, then music could be seen as significantly affecting perception of the scenes. Again, we use a t-test for these values with a sample size of 60. Finally, we would use a 2-sample t-test to compare values of musical ratings and differences in evaluations between musical experts and non-musical experts between the no music and music conditions. The expected value is 0 if our null hypothesis is true, as musical expertise wouldn't make a difference in their evaluations of the music or the film. The sample sizes are both 30. From this statistical analysis, we would be able to determine significance to answer if our null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis is true. Again, for the first statistical analysis, the null hypothesis would be true if the music had consistently had ratings of 5 and 5, but the alternative hypothesis would be true rather if the music ratings were in line with what we would expect with four-dimensional valence theory. For the second statistical analysis, we would accept the alternative hypothesis if the difference was significant in the direction we would expect with four-dimensional valence theory. And for the final statistical analysis, we would accept the alternative hypothesis if there was a significant difference in any direction between the musical and non-musically inclined groups. Because we could not conduct an experiment this large and of this scale, I instead interviewed 4 people I knew and put them through this exact experimental paradigm to gain a bit of theoretical data and information. Participant 1 is a 20-year-old female with 10 years of instrument experience. Participant 2 is a 24-year-old male with 12 years of instrument experience. Participant 3 is a 48-year-old female with no instrument experience, and participant 4 is a 52-year-old male with no instrument experience. It should be noted that age may be a confounding factor here, but since we're not drawing statistically significant conclusions, we're ignoring that for now, but that would be one thing you would control for in the larger experiment. From the first experiment regarding musical evaluations, we found that both groups of participants more or less follow the 4-dimensional valence theory in terms of emotion and arousal ratings we would expect from the 4 music conditions. However, this is only true in a relative sense of the word. For example, while calm music is expected to have a positive affect and a low arousal, the 4 participants instead consistently actually rated calm music as having an average arousal rating above 5 at a 5.5. However, when compared to the average arousal ratings of the music conditions that we actually expected to be high arousal, such as the happy and angry music, the arousal ratings were much higher at an average of 7.5 and 7, respectively. Thus, we find that valence theory is true in a relative sense of the word. So while it didn't always predict whether people would rate music above or below 5 in the way we would expect, as in low arousal means below a 5 on the arousal scale, comparatively to other music conditions, song ratings were what we would expect. We also found that non-music experts were more likely to closely, relatively at least, follow 4-dimensional valence theory than the music experts. For the second set of experiments, we saw similar effects in terms of the effect that music had on emotion and arousal ratings of films. While they were not always necessarily in the direction we would expect on the scale, as in above or below 5, again, they were accurate relative to the other music conditions as we expected from 4-dimensional valence theory. For example, while imposing calm music was generally rated as having an increased arousal for the neutral scene, we saw a much greater increase in arousal for happy and angry music that, again, we actually expected to see these music conditions increase arousal. So for calm music, relative to angry and happy music, it did have low arousal. We also saw that several factors, such as learned film music associations and dissonance between the scene and the music, can greatly affect interpretation in both the emotional and arousal scales. For example, participant 2 noted that the neutral scene and happy music condition we played for him alluded to psychopathy just because of how jarring and unpaired and dissonant the music and the film were when played together. He noted that he has seen many dark scenes paired with lighter music in plenty of Hollywood movies before, and that they may have influenced his perception of the scene and made him perceive it as darker or having a sinister undertone. Because of this dissonance between the music and film and his learned associations from previous films that he has seen, he ended up rating the neutral scene with happy music as actually having a negative affect and a decrease on the emotional scale than when the neutral scene was played without music. Future experiments could attempt to control for dissonance between film and music, as well as previous learned film music associations. Another finding of ours was that sometimes context can change without emotion or arousal rating changing. Participant 2's ratings for emotion and arousal did not change when we imposed happy music over our happy scene, but he did note that the people in the happy scene who were dancing looked crazy and happy because they were on drugs and dancing because of those drugs when we played the scene without music. Meanwhile, while we played the scene with happy music, although the emotion and arousal ratings didn't change, he thought that they were just badly dancing to the happy music. Furthermore, we found that, for the neutral scene, energy ratings increased no matter what type of music we imposed over it when compared to the no music condition. Finally, in regards to congruent music changing emotion and arousal versus incongruent music, we found that congruent music changes emotion and arousal ratings significantly less in absolute value than they are usually changed when music is played over a neutral scene or when incongruent music is played over a scene. Meanwhile, incongruent music changes emotion and arousal ratings in absolute value far more than they are normally changed when music is paired with a neutral scene. As to our question of the differences between non-musical experts and musical experts, other than finding that our non-musical experts more closely followed four-dimensional valence theory, we found that musical experts have more outside associations and opinions about music and have greater changes in the absolute values of their emotion and arousal ratings when music is played over a scene compared to no music. Basically, this suggests that they have a greater emotion or arousal reaction to music, or they're more affected by the presence of music. Finally, non-musical experts tend to have more positive changes in arousal and emotion associated with music, whereas musical experts are more willing to note a decrease in affect or arousal associated with music. Ultimately, because of the small scale of this experiment, we're not able to make any significant conclusions regarding our null and alternative hypotheses. However, if a research group were to conduct a formal experiment using this paradigm, we are confident that it would yield results of importance and value to this field. That was all for our theoretical experiment to investigate the conjunction of music and film. Please read the future directions page on our website if you are interested in learning about how research into this field could progress even further. If you are interested in trying out the experiment on yourself, then here are the pieces of music we used to test our 4 interviewees, and we would maybe theoretically use to test our participants. The happy music we used was Haydn's Trumpet Concerto in E-flat. The angry music we used was Vivaldi's Four Seasons, Summer, Presto. The calm music we used was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, opening 9, number 2. And finally, the sad music we used was Albione's Adagio. Again, thank you all for listening, and I hope you learned something valuable.